Greetings, everyone. It seems to be that time of year. The world grows a little bit grayer, and the ground is invaded by a veil of white. Children begin writing letters in hopes of obtaining all the things their parents denied them the other 364 days. Couples are making plans to see shining streets lit up by various patterns of colors. Movies that used to be played on dusty old VHS tapes are being streamed straight to our TVs by dozens of different services. 'Tis the season to think fondly of your friends and family, to snuggle up with a warm blanket and cautiously sip away at hot chocolate. The air is cold as you step out on your porch to grab the mail. You walk further out, the feeling of the cold wooden porch slipping through your fuzzy slippers with each step. Your movements are hurried as you pace down the front steps and quickly retrieve the envelopes from their resting place. Your movements are less hurried as you pull back up the stairs, shuffling through the mail until trying to see which bills will poison your ability to buy the presents you want. There you are, frozen for just a moment on your steps, standing right under the edge of your roof, wondering why the electric company was sending you a statement when you had just paid. Staring at the white paper, you see a small section of it saturate and turn to gray. Looking up, you see another bead of water dripping from the icicle above your head. And before you have time to react, you feel your body go numb, limp, and you crash to the ground, ragdolling down the stairs. A neighbor leaving their home is horrified to discover you laying at the bottom of your steps motionless. A long translucent formation of ice sticking out from your right eyes. Billows of red slowly work their way to the white around you. You are gone. And while your death might sound outlandish, it's far from it. In 2010, 5 people were killed in Russia by falling icicles, and around 150 were injured. And while it's rare, it happens enough to make you think twice about hanging out under them. December can be beautiful, and Christmas is something millions look forward to. But seldom do we ponder the impact on our lifespans the season can bring. There are many things we love about Christmas that have been the instruments used to steal life away from those around us. The fancy lights hanging around our houses and the trees we pull inside to put gifts under have been known to cause fatal fires. The parties that pick up in frequency around the holidays and the slick conditions left on the road cause a spike in the accidents, leaving some fatally injured. Even the nutmeg we place into eggnog can be lethal in high enough doses. While there are so many dangers present by the season, still, humans find a way to be the largest predators on the block. So, as you lay lifeless on the ground, face pierced by the frozen water, what you failed to see was the jealous ex-lover sneaking away before anyone had a chance to spot him. His fingerprints melting along with the icicle, proof of his assault, vanishing into the snow. But don't worry, your pretty little blood-seeping head. You aren't alone in this terrible fate. Many others have lost their lives around the holidays. So, to make you feel better, why don't I regale you of fates much like your own? 12 individuals who lost their life around the most festive of holidays, meeting their end as the world is blanketed in snow. Let's travel back a little bit to, let's say, 1929. It's December 25th and Charlie Lawson and his family of 7 are celebrating Christmas. Even in spite of the Great Depression that had started just a year before, Charlie and his family were blessed. His children and wife were treated to new clothing and even got their picture taken. It was a lot more than families at that time could stake claim to. Everything seemed to be going so well, yet still they somehow ended up being talked about in this video. Well, the reasons will always be unknown, a climax to a film no one ever witnessed. It doesn't matter the reason though, as two of the younger daughters were exiting the house to visit more family for the holiday. 2 shots rang out. The daughters would die side by side at the hand of their father. From there, Charlie would go on a brutal and unforgiving killing spree, taking one member after another out. First, his wife, sitting on the porch, then he made his way inside to shoot down. The oldest daughter, 2 younger sons, and the infant were never going to see the outside of the house again. Charlie would then walk to the woods nearby and use the same gun to take his life. An entire family wiped out in one swift spree. Well, not the entire family. Just as unknown as Charlie's reasoning for his actions was the reason Charlie had sent his oldest son out of the house on an errand moments before taking the lives of everyone in the house. There are many things we'll never get the answers for, and the Amityville slaying of the Lawsons and the creation of the sole survivor will forever be among those things. Wow, we started a little dark there, didn't we? I figured we might as well jump in from the get-go. Let the spiking chill of the water wash over us. No sense in dipping your toes in. And while you struggle to get some air back in your lungs, why don't we just move right on to the next murder haunting the spirit of Christmas? Since we are already in our little time machine, why don't we travel even further back to the year 1881? It was the settling hours of Christmas Eve between December 23rd and 24th that Emma Carrico made a short trip to her neighbor's house to study with her friends Franny and Robert Gibbons. With Emma's mom right next door, the 3 hung out and enjoyed each other's company, biding time till Christmas. A Christmas that would unfortunately never arrive for them. Emma's mom would wait for her daughter's arrival back home, but instead of a knock at the door, she would notice a light pressing through the window. Her neighbor's house had been set ablaze, the same house her daughter had gone to visit. Naturally, the mother cried out for help, but it was too late. By the time the fire was cleared, all that was found was the charred remains of the 3 teens. It was later revealed that there was no accidental fire. 3 men brandishing axes had broken into the home while the kids studied and took their lives before setting the place on fire and fleeing. It was one of the men, George Ellis, who ended up confessing to the crime and ratting out the 2 that committed it with him, William Neal and Ellis Craft. Unfortunately for the men, this was during a time when justice was dealt in a more spectacular fashion. A year later, the 2 men had been given up. Neal and Craft were both sentenced to execution by hanging. George, the one who had confessed, managed to avoid the state sentencing him to hanging, instead being given life in prison. Though the state and the public had very different intentions. George's life in prison would be very short-lived, as on the night of his conviction, a lynch mob would come for him, and just as his companions left, he too was embraced by a thick rope around his neck and the cold axe of death that served him justice. There we go. 12 Murders of Christmas. Oh, no. That was only 2. Well, no need to dilly-dally, I suppose. There are remains awaiting our arrival. Again we travel, this time, to a galaxy far, far away. Actually, the galaxy wasn't that far away. It was, this galaxy actually. Despite being confined to the boundaries of the Milky Way, 2 would-be murderers still opted to use phrases found in the Star Wars series to secretly plot their killing. Roger was a married man, one who was seeing a woman on the side. Samina Imam, who believed that before long she and Roger would be public. But since we're here talking about her, we can surmise the grim fate that awaits for her before that day ever came. Roger with his brother David would plan to kill the woman before Roger's wife could ever discover the affair. David was meant to abduct the unsuspecting woman on December 12th. The 2 culprits exchanged quotes from Star Wars to secretly discuss the proceedings of the event. Death Star complete. Stay on target. You are expecting Vader. This attempt to abduct the woman would end in failure despite the months of planning beforehand. Though, it was only 12 days later on the eve of Christmas that the brothers would make another attempt. A much more lasting attempt. Roger drove Samina to his home where she would be attacked by the pair and eventually subdued with the use of chloroform. A strange mixture of metals administered through liquid would also be found during an autopsy. Pulling over the side of the road, David would dispose of their victim's body, stuffed inside a sleeping bag, and then placed deep underground. One can only wonder if David was aware of the irony that hung on his allotment shed, a sign reading, "Don't wind me up. I'm running out of places to hide the bodies." Pieces of the affair would start to fall in place as people noticed Samina had gone missing. It wasn't long before that the pair was arrested for the murder on July 7th and charged just 2 days after. By the time the 2 would see another Christmas, it would be behind a set of iron bars where they would spend their next 30 years. For anyone who has been interested in true crime for a reasonable or perhaps unhealthy amount of time, our next Christmas murder should have been on the tip of your tongue for a while now. Now, doubt you've watched the video or come across a podcast discussing the story of a life lost far too soon. One that happened to be taken so close to Christmas. Born August 6, 1990, JonBenet Ramsey was just 6 years old when her story was cut short on December 25th of 1996. Her parents had noticed that the little girl was missing and reported this with the Boulder police. It was just 7 hours after this report that JonBenet's father, John, would find the little girl's body. Her skull had suffered a blow intense enough to fracture it, and though her cause of death would be ruled as asphyxiation due to the garrote wire that had been wrapped around her throat. As I said, this case is a fairly well-known one, possibly due to JonBenet having been entered into beauty pageants by her mother, Patsy, who was also a former beauty queen. An anonymous ransom note would later be found in the home. Naturally, it was initially assumed that the parents had something to do with it. Police assumed that John and Patsy, and possibly JonBenet's brother, who was just 9 at that time, had set the whole thing up to look like a homicide. Through the DNA evidence that they could acquire, the family was cleared of foul play. Unlike the other crimes before this one, we are still left without a culprit. No motive, rhyme, or reason behind her loss of life. And the case remains open, and the police of Boulder, Colorado, continue to search for closure. From one mystery to another, the lives that we lost sometimes leave us with more questions than answers. At least in the case of JonBenet Ramsey, we know that a homicide had taken place. Sometimes, mourning parents aren't even offered this much solace. As we move on to our 5th murder of Christmas, we will become familiar with what it means to be whisked away in the night. Christmas Eve 1945, excited for the following day, the Sodder family went to bed. The family consisted of George and Jenny, along with 9 of their children, while the 10 siblings were off in the army. It was around 1 a.m. that flames started reaching through the halls of their home, disrupting their slumber. Frantic and confused, their parents desperately tried evacuating their children. Along with the parents, 4 of the other children managed to make it to safety away from the inferno. George had not given up though. Throwing himself back into the fire, he searched for the remaining 5 children, trying everything he could to reach the children that should have been on the top floor. And despite the injuries he retained, he went through all of his options. The ladder that he always kept on the side of the house was bizarrely missing. The trucks he drove nearly daily failed to start, and the bucket they used to collect rainwater had frozen over. It seemed like the universe was actively working against the retrieval of his children. 5 kids, never to be seen again. When the fire died down and the people searched through the rubble, no signs of the children's bodies were found. And while the fire might have been hot enough to incinerate remains, George and Jenny began to believe otherwise, as they recalled even prior. There was a series of bizarre encounters with strangers. One, a wanderer who chided George for the state of his fuse boxes despite them being checked previously. Another attempted to sell life insurance. When declined, he warned George that his house would go up in smoke. Then finally, a call came as the children opened presents at around 12:30 Christmas morning. The strange voice asked for the name of someone who wasn't there. Jeannie said she could hear conversations going on in the background, and Jeannie hung up after informing the woman that she had the wrong number. The next thing either parent would know, their house was rolling in smoke, and despite being later told their lines were cut and not burned. So, the cause of the fire being faulty wiring didn't add up. Nothing about the case did. Many strange events would follow the incident that would cause the family to question what really happened more and more. And through it all was a billboard printed in black and white displaying the faces of the missing children and the reward that was awaiting information that would lead to their return. This case has rabbit holes worth of oddities that make it one of the more mysterious cases you'll come across, but we have other tragedies to attend to, so we can't dwell on one family forever. We'll move on to an event that, while not explicitly a murder, does involve the loss of life at the hands of other humans, and is an example of how quickly panic can turn to tragedy. On Christmas Eve of 1913, a union for a mining company that had been on strike decided to throw an unofficial company Christmas party. More than 600 people consisting of the miners and their families packed into an Italian hall at what would come to be known as Calumet, Michigan. Sometime during the night, someone had begun shouting and trying to warn people in the hall about a fire. Panic broke out quickly among the crowd as over 600 people tried to evacuate the building. And during this rampage, however, 73 were trampled to death. Most of these people were children. And worst of all, there was no fire. The person who made the false alarm was never identified, though some believe to have been someone from the mining company the union was striking. This was never proven. All anyone knew was how quickly their glee had turned into unintentional murder. Office parties can be a blast or a nightmare, depending on what you think of your coworkers. Though most of us should be thankful that no parties ended up in such a disaster. There are many traditions and iconography surrounding Christmas, more than most any other holiday. One symbol remains one of the most notable references for the holiday spirit, and that's the big jolly man himself, Santa Claus. Most of the time, children and adults alike would be hard-pressed not to smile when the big man clad in red walked into the room. This case, however, had cheers of excitement warp into cries of horror. Yes, we have to travel to another Christmas party. This one was a smaller affair though. Sylvia Pardo was at her house with 24 other guests on December 24th of 2008. It was during the party that Bruce Pardo would enter wearing a Santa suit. Bruce and Sylvia had finalized their divorce just a week prior. And as he entered with a gift that he had brought, and he quickly pulled a handgun and the first shot was fired at his niece, just 8 years old. Bruce would continue to fire at the fleeing group of guests, striking several, and it was believed that he stood above his victims, and using one of the 4 handguns he brought with him, he stood above victims, pointedly executing them. Deciding to end his rampage, Bruce unwrapped the present he had brought with him, a rolling air compressor that shot gasoline all over the home, which he used to set the house on fire. When all was said and done, Bruce's assault had killed 9 of the 25 party-goers and injured another 3. The niece who had greeted him at the door, despite being shot in the face, managed to survive the assault. Bruce would then flee the scene and would put an end to his own life the next day at his brother's home, refusing to face justice for his crimes. The holidays can bring many emotions out, and some of those emotions aren't so jolly. So many of us have fond memories of wandering down the stairs, cutting through the crisp December air to find a bundle of neatly wrapped presents under the tree. Our minds glowing abuzz with possibilities, hoping we had been good enough that year for Santa to bring us only the finest presents. If you're anything like me, a moderately sane person, the last thing you'd expect to find a tree is a body. This was the grim reality that faced Phil Axe as he searched through his sister's house after she failed to show up for work. As he traversed through the house, having to search the whole place over and over again, Eventually, walking by the tree set up with lights and ornaments, he discovered a foot sticking out from amongst the wrapped gifts. The foot belonged to his twin sister, Michelle O'Dowd. The place seemed to have been turned upside down. Chairs and tables turned over and items had been ransacked. It would be revealed that O'Dowd's giving nature was taken advantage of by someone who was considered close to the family. Patty White, someone who struggled to hold a job and was often given work by O'Dowd and the family. O'Dowd offered Patty a place to stay on the holiday, allowing her to live there for a month rent-free, even trusting Patty enough to give her the PIN code to her debit card. While no one is sure exactly what transpired in the home, neighbors report hearing screaming on the night of the murder, though no one called the police in regards to it. After the murder, Patty would go through the house and try to stage the scene to look like a home invasion. She would then leave the strangled body amongst the beaten and battered Christmas tree to be found later stuffed into the presents. She fled the scene though, and she would return to South Carolina where she would turn herself in and face a 45-year sentence for her crimes. The world gets a little colder as Christmas rolls around, and unfortunately, so do some hearts around the time. It can be a beautiful sight to see thin layers of white powder resting on barren trees and sidewalks, covering the world in a soft haze that makes everything just a little more still, a little more quiet. The white powder that falls from the sky can bring quite a bit of serenity to our lives. The white powder that goes up your nose, however. William Stevenson found himself driving with two others in the bushlands, where two individuals, Daniel Kerr and Darren Lewis, would brutally assault and kill William. Though the motives, like so many other cases, are unclear, the results are damning. The guilty party claims that a fight had broken out, and the murder took place on the 25th, resting among the horrific crimes that we've talked about already. Kerr lived with William for an unspecified period of time, though in the time frame, Kerr claimed to have been often off her head through the use of methamphetamines. So it is believed that the pair was either under the influence at the time of the murder or the fight evolved around the substance. And either way, the attack was described as savage and cowardly. William was assaulted repeatedly with a large rock, all while attempting to plead for his life with no avail. He was then stabbed several times as Darren Lewis cackled and referred to what was described as their Kill Bill related plans. What any of this means or why the murder took place at all, it's possible not even the killers are aware, though they have plenty of time to think of it as they serve their sentences in prison. It's important to spend time with your loved ones during the holidays. Cherish their presence as you never know when you're going to lose them. Though not all time spent with family is wholesome. And this is more true in the case of Ronald Simmons than most others. You could say Ronald's rampage was a gift that just kept giving. On December 28, 1987, Ronald made his way into a law firm and shot a receptionist that had denied his advances. He then carried on to an oil company's office and shot at two of the executives there, managing to add another body to his tally and only injuring the other. Then after a short drive, he would arrive at his former place of work and shoot at two more workers. both who only sustained injuries. He would then make one more stop at a motor freight company where he would shoot yet again, take another shot. This time at a woman who went on to survive. After his rampage through Russellville, Arkansas, he would sit down and wait for the police to get him. That sounds like a lot, right? We could end this case and it would fit right in with the others. But as I said, it's important to spend time with your family. As police detained Ronald, the state would discover that this was simply the final act of Ronald's horrible timeline. It would be revealed that 6 days prior to his shooting spree, Ronald had strangled and shot his wife and 6 children. Those bodies stayed there in the home with Ronald, who would only leave the house to visit a local bar. Then, on Boxing Day, 9 more relatives would show up to Ronald's house to celebrate the holiday, all of which, including Ronald's grandchildren, would join Ronald's body count, bringing his reign of terror up to 16 lives lost and several others affected. On June 25th, 3 years later, Ronald's execution warrant was signed by the governor of Arkansas at that time, Bill Clinton, and Ronald was killed by lethal injection. A gift can be many things, all the way from a simple handwritten note to a brand new PlayStation 5. PlayStation 5. Please, Santa, I'm literally begging you, I'll be as good as I have to be for a PlayStation 5. I won't even tell anyone. Sorry. What I was saying. Right. A present can be many things, but being so far into our subject, I'm sure you know that not all presents are welcomed ones. Alexis Valdez was struggling to find housing as many college students do, but was lucky enough to find a place to rest his head offered by his aunt and her boyfriend. All Silvestre Diaz Hernandez required of Alexis was that he stayed in school, work, and was willing to help out with bills. Before long, though, Alexis ended up leaving school and quitting his job, and not longer after, leaving him unable to hold up his end of the bargain. So naturally, Silvestre and his aunt requested that Alexis leave their home, though, unfortunately, the timing couldn't have been worse. It was Christmas after all. Alexis, not wanting to be kicked out, went to confront Silvestre, and the confrontation quickly boiled the rage inside Alexis. At some point during the fight, he would snap and begin assaulting him with a hammer, striking his body until he died from the injuries. He would further mutilate his body and go on to completely dismember Diaz Hernandez, going so far as to completely sever his head and disfigure his face until it was nearly unrecognizable. He would call the police on himself and admit to his crime, but not before going into his aunt's room and leaving her boyfriend's head in the bed, describing it to the cops as a present. Though this wasn't the most chilling statement he made, claiming that he would have killed his aunt too if she had been home. We have discussed many horrors that have taken place in this joyous season, many horrific acts incited on bodies and minds, people left with their lives changed or with no life at all, and we have only scratched the surface of the crimes that have taken place on Christmas. It was hard to pick which story to end our 12 murders of Christmas on. Do we look for the strangest mystery, the bloodiest crime scene, the highest body count? Or maybe we can leave with a song, a lingering folk song to sing through the stillness of the winter. The song inspired by Stagger Lee and the murder that took place on Christmas. On Christmas night in 1985, William "Billy" Lyons made his way into Bill Curtis' saloon where he would sit and begin to drink. Not long after, Lee Shelton would walk into the very same saloon. Lee Shelton was a known criminal, a pimp who had earned the nickname Stagger Lee. The two men were rivals of sorts as they both had their hands dipped into the prostitution business. It was no surprise that two men would sit down and play a game of cards, gambling off a game of craps, but as many games between men like them ended back then, they began arguing and eventually started to push each other. William reached over and pulled the white Stetson hat right off of Stagger Lee's head and spit in it. But Stagger Lee was not a man to trifle with, so in response, Lee pulled out his revolver and shot William point blank in the abdomen. As William laid on the ground dying, Lee picked up his hat proclaiming, "I told you to give my hat back," before calmly walking out of the saloon. The law moved at a much quicker pace in those days, and Lee was arrested in his home, and 2 days later was forced to look at the body of the man he killed. At first, the jury was deadlocked under Lee's claim that the murder was self-defense, but during the second trial, the pimp was convicted to 25 years in prison. Though he got parole after only 12 years, Stagger Lee was a criminal and would still end up dying behind bars after being brought in under assault and robbery charges. He passed away in 1911, and the song written about that Christmas would go on to reach number 1 in the billboards in 1959. It was Stagger Lee and Billy, two men who gambled late. Stagger Lee threw 7. Billy swore that he threw 8. So that's where we are left. A dozen harrowing cases of sorrowful loss. Not even the greatest gifts and the most pleasant company can keep dark hearts at bay. So remember to stay safe and warm this holiday season. Appreciate the time that you have with yourself and the ones around you. Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays. Hi everyone. Happy Holidays. I would like to give a big shout out to Author Jojo for making this video possible. Yeah, it was him who wrote the amazing script for this video. And other than that, he also writes a lot of different stories, has his own channel, and just an overall talented person. So if you want to check his work out, all the links to his work are in the description of this video. Please do check it out and give him all the love he deserves. Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate each and every one of you. But I would also like to thank my amazing patrons, my top tippers, and my dearest channel members. Thank you very, very much. I really appreciate it with all of my heart. If you want to support the channel further, you could also choose to become a patron, a tipper, or a channel member. But remember, it's appreciated, but never a requirement. I would also like to announce that we have merch now. The link is in the description of the video, along with all my other social media links, like my Discord server, Twitter, Instagram, and others. You can connect with me and send your stories there. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't yet, and comments are highly appreciated. And remember, your fear feeds me.